Welcome to Scotland is Now, Race to Zero, a two-day conference brought to you by Team Scotland, a partnership approach led by Scottish Development International and the Scottish Government, in collaboration with city regions and key stakeholders. We hope that you'll be able to join several of our sessions over the two-day event. Full details of the programme and our fantastic speakers can be found on the conference website, www.scotlandracetozero.co.uk. I am Mary Henderson from Scottish Development International, and I am here to introduce our next session, which is Green Investment in Glasgow. And I'd now like to hand over to Andy Mace, Director with ARUP, who will be chairing the discussion. Andy.
Marie, thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation over the next hour or so with our esteemed panel, as Marie says, as we discuss some of the green investment opportunities in Glasgow. I joined ARUP in 2000 purposely to work on projects pushing the envelope on the sustainability agenda, and it kind of feels like I've been training for 2 decades for this moment, with the Paris Agreement, myriad climate emergencies being announced, huge depth and breadth of positive action being taken equitably to net zero, whilst coincidentally building resilience and restoring our ecosystems, and of course the growing energy around COP26 coming to Glasgow, arguably the most important conference of the parties since Paris. Scotland's programme for government, of course, sets out really ambitious plans around decarbonisation, adaptation, together with supporting programmes around green jobs and skills, and of course the new Scottish Investment Bank with its missions around supporting the net zero transition, building communities and harnessing innovation. And of course we also have the Green Investment Portfolio for Scotland, which is at the heart of this conference with the first tranche of investment opportunities, including Glasgow Best Projects. Our panel this afternoon and the organisations they are part of with other partners and through mechanisms like Sustainable Glasgow have absolutely been key to building Glasgow's reputation as a smart, sustainable city of the future. With more than £1.5 billion of new investment estimated to be on the cards for Scotland's largest city over the next decade, with the low carbon and renewable energy sector, and Glasgow expecting to spend millions on enabling electric vehicle adoption, installing heat pumps and modernising its energy networks in order to become the UK's first net zero city. So I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Gavin Slater, Head of Sustainability at Glasgow City Council, Barry Carruthers, Head of or Hydrogen Director at Scottishpower, Ian Manson, the CEO at Clyde Gateway, and Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli, Principal and Vice Chancellor at the University of Glasgow. So I'm going to ask each member of the panel to say a little bit about the net zero ambitions of their organisation to set the scene. And after this, we'll have a question and answer session, and we'll try and get through as many of your questions from the audience as we can before a few closing comments from the panel and me, and the end of the session at 4 o'clock. So please, I would ask you all in the audience as our panelists introduce themselves. Do start posting your questions, ready for the Q&A session in about 10 minutes' time. So with that, I'm keen to hear more about things from our panelists. So Gavin, if I may turn to you first, can I ask a little bit about Glasgow's ambitions for the race to net zero, and how important the Sustainable Glasgow Partnership in particular has been in working to achieve this?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks very much for inviting me to be part of such an important event. I think Glasgow's ambitions for net zero are fairly clearly stated. It's absolutely critical to the city that we have a just and equitable transition to a zero carbon city. And the leader of the council will have made that point this morning very clearly, and that is key to all of our considerations moving forward. And there are many things that we have to consider as part of our ambition to reach that. We are very, very determined to improve the air quality of Glasgow, to ensure that we grow and make more opportunities for sustainable transport, that we embed circularity into our economy. We've launched our circular economy route map, and there's a lot of work to do there to make sure that circularity becomes embedded in every aspect of our business. Green economic growth is a key consideration as well, something that with the pandemic and the recovery from the pandemic is central to our thoughts. What opportunities can arise from this? How can we best manage this situation to make sure that the green part of that recovery is front and centre. Obviously, climate change and the mitigation and adaptation from the impacts of climate change, again, vitally important. We're in the process of launching our climate emergency implementation plan. And within that, net zero is one of the key considerations. There are many various different things. You mentioned energy efficiency and energy networks, heat systems, transport. These are our real critical points where we need to look at how we're dealing with those emissions. The list goes on and on. To do that, to deliver on these things, you mentioned Sustainable Glasgow. Sustainable Glasgow is absolutely key. For those of you who don't know, Sustainable Glasgow was set up in 2010, set up in partnership with the Council and the Scottish Government and the University of Strathclyde. And at that time, we had a stated ambition of reducing the city's emissions by 30% by 2020, and that was set against a 2006 baseline. We achieved that 30% reduction in 2015, and have since gone on to the last recorded data in 2018 to achieve a reduction of 37.5%. So a lot of good work's been done. Still a long way from being net zero, but a lot of that has been about the partnerships that we've built, the innovations that we've managed to drive through those partnerships. And we've got to a stage now, in 2019, the Council brought together many stakeholders to declare a state of climate and ecological emergency. From that, the need to be carbon neutral by 2030 and net zero by 2045, and the need to drive forward plans for net zero. And we looked again at Sustainable Glasgow as our vehicle to do that. But we decided to change things up a bit. We decided to really try and accelerate Sustainable Glasgow's ambition. And beyond just having a board, which is currently chaired by the leader of the council, Susan Aitken, and his members, many of whom are here today, but including Scottishpower, the Universities of Strathclyde and Glasgow, Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Government, Clyde Gateway, the Wheatley Group, many, many different important stakeholders in the city. We set up 4 thematic hubs sitting underneath the board to really drive forward action, to really capitalise on the focus and opportunity that's come with COP26 and really push for action beyond words. So we have 4 thematic hubs, one on heating and housing, one on green infrastructure and transport, one on the green economy and private sector, and finally one on greening and rewilding the city. All important themes, and with those hubs, we've taken all the partners that are in the board, but also expanded to take organisations that are not formally partners in Sustainable Glasgow, but are key contributors to our opportunities here. So Sustainable Glasgow continues to grow, continues to innovate, and continues to change in response to our needs. And it sits key at the centre of all of our relationships and driving forward the necessary innovation and work that hopefully will get us to net zero.
Gavin, thanks so much. That's a really fantastic sort of breadth of sort of awareness of things you have there, of that's going on, and really good to sort of underpin the importance of Sustainable Glasgow partnership in driving things, and some really good building blocks there. I wanted to turn to Anton, if I may, and Anton, to ask you about the University of Glasgow's plans for net zero and how things are progressing, and also how you see the university and its importance in sort of developing its net zero and contributing to the wider plans of the city.
Well, thank you, Andy, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, and thank you to SDI for inviting me to participate in today's panel. The first point I wanted to make is that there's no shortage of ambition across Glasgow. In this panel, across the conference, you're going to hear obviously from city government, from industry, public and private partnerships, a whole range of stakeholders. And all of us are united by a common goal of tackling climate change. And crucially, there's widespread commitment across the whole city to ensuring our actions complement and reinforce one another. And this is vital because, frankly, it's only by working together that we're going to meet the moment of COP26. So you asked about the university, and from my perspective, the university can contribute in 4 distinct ways. First, we must accelerate progress towards our own climate goals. You mentioned, or Gavin mentioned 2019. In May 2019, we became the first Scottish university to declare a climate emergency, and we've since committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2030, which is probably the most ambitious target by any UK university. And that target of carbon neutrality by 2030 was set out in our new climate strategy, Glasgow Green, published at the end of last year, which outlines concrete steps to reduce our carbon emissions and be a beacon of good practice. We've set out clearly how we will do this in terms of scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. And we're about to set out in our current strategic plan, which goes to 2025, a key performance indicator target, which provides a staging post to that 2030 target. And while our community recognises that transformational change won't happen overnight, universities really have an obligation to lead from the front and to ensure that sustainability runs through to our campus, our strategy, the full scope of our activities. So the second point I wanted to make is that the university has considerable convening power. The very nature of the work that we do means that we sit at the cross-section between academia, industry, private sector, and as a result, we can bring researchers and practitioners together in the pursuit of collective solutions and joint impact. In recent months, for instance, we've run a series of green recovery dialogues spearheaded by our Centre for Sustainable Solutions, and indeed some of my fellow panelists participated in these very sessions. Third, we are also a very major economic actor in the city. We're an organisation of over 8,000 employees, we have turnover about 700 million. We have a campus investment plan of over £1 billion, which is still in full swing despite the COVID crisis. And much of that has the aim of improving our carbon footprint to help us meet the target that we're set as part of Glasgow Green, whether that's through the replacement of new for old estate or improving our ageing estate in terms of how we heat it and light it. We're committed to continuing this agenda both in the run-up to COP26 and thereafter. And as a proudly civic university, we really feel duty-bound to facilitate progress towards our shared citywide sustainability goals. And finally, we can help to ensure that the post-pandemic recovery has sustainability at its centre. You know, COVID may have shifted the prevailing landscape, but it hasn't altered the urgency of tackling climate change or the demand for innovative solutions. And as we build back from COVID, we have an opportunity to focus in on environmental objectives and identify new ways of working which have the potential to drive progress on that road, difficult road to net zero. And as a centre of world-leading research and expertise, not only can the university work with industry to make this a reality, but we can help de-risk some of that investment environment by boosting confidence in emerging technologies and actually creating a demand pool for new solutions. That's what we can do. Thank you.
Anton, thank you. It really good reminder there of the breadth of the university's activities and contribution across the city and beyond. Barry, I wanted to turn to you and ask, from your perspective, and a little bit about the work that that Scottishpower is doing in the city, and how you as an organisation are helping to drive forward the transition on clean energy and transport, and also maybe just to pick up on a couple of the points that Anton and Gavin have said about the importance of partnership across the city for you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think our kind of general perspective would be, we've been on a decade of transition ourselves as a business. And when you think over that kind of 10-year period, we've shut down our coal plants, and we've got, the great footage nowadays that you see of coal plants being razed to the ground, which actually symbolically is a really, really nice piece of footage to have. And at the same time, you see the growth of onshore wind, offshore wind, solar. So we as a company have gone over that decade of transition, and it kind of feels like this is the decade of delivery, really, for all the aspects of society to come together in the same challenge. So we kind of feel like we're well positioned to help with that. And you're right, partnerships is going to be key to that. There's so many aspects of the chain that we try to make sure we're playing our part in. Everything from, of course, producing the renewable energy. And again, we are focused entirely on zero carbon here. For us, it's a race to zero. It's not a race to almost zero or a race to doing things slightly better than they were before. It is a race to zero. And that's why we are looking at the production side. So to try and bring the solutions offshore, onshore, solar, green hydrogen, of course, is part of that story now. That's the production part. The second part now we're looking for is how to get those solutions from A to B, and that plays into some of the things we've talked about infrastructure, because we can have great solutions at production end, we can have great solutions at the customer end, but if we can't get the clean energy from A to B, then none of it's going to happen. So that middle piece is really, really important. And then the last piece is just about allowing individuals to make choices. Now, that might be an individual at the head of a big organisation and they make big chunky decisions, but we also need to make it individual-led decisions for people who are in this region and actually have options. So for us, we need to make things kind of easy. It can't be something where people think it's either really expensive or really difficult to take on that decarbonisation challenge in their own lives. It needs to be visible. We really need to have flagship things. We've got an incredibly iconic wind farm, obviously just south of Glasgow. That helps to bring it to life, but we need other things. We need the electric buses, the hydrogen bin lorries driving around. We need it to be visible so that people can see the transition happening. And then the last thing is just beneficial. Of course, we need to highlight and show to people that it is beneficial to go this way. And Gavin touched on it. One of the easiest things to bring to people's lives is cleaner air. And that's what we should be doing. So I think we've got enough component parts in terms of bringing those projects to life. For us as a company, as part of the wider Iberdrola group, we are looking to invest 75 billion over the next 5 years, so up to 2025. And we've earmarked kind of 10 billion for that for UK alone. So that takes us a lot into renewables and also infrastructure to allow that renewables to make its way to the customer. So for us, it's an incredibly exciting decade ahead. We kind of feel like we've done a lot of great stuff in the background. It just feels like now is the time, on the back of COP26, on the back of everything, having all the solutions in our hands, and now it has to become right into people's kind of homes. When you flick the light switch, the car that you drive, the bus that you get, the train that you get, these are the real kind of tangible things that hopefully communities can start to see the benefit of.
All right, thank you. No, I absolutely share your excitement, and a couple of things that really chime with me there. Your point about action being at the heart of this COP this year in Glasgow, and also that point about making it real, for people, for us and the citizens, so people can start to see what net zero means for them, and isn't necessarily the huge change in lifestyles that maybe perhaps some people are fearing. Ian, coming to you, if I may, and just to ask you, just set out, this huge program of work that you're leading here, but just in a few minutes, some of the key regeneration plans for Clyde Gateway, and given the longevity of that, probably a change that you've seen with with an ever increasing focus on net zero. So just keen to understand, how things are sort of starting to support that agenda.
Okay, thanks, Andy. These were great comments for me to build on about action and community and making it all tangible, because that's very much what we do. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today and also to address investors. And I can assure investors who are watching this that there are great opportunities in Clyde Gateway. So look very closely at us. Clyde Gateway is regenerating a significant area of the east end of Glasgow, southeast Glasgow, and also into South Lanarkshire. It's been doing that for over 10 years, as you rightly say, and we're providing a legacy for the Commonwealth Games, in effect, a legacy before it and after it. And we've been involved in projects that you would call broadly green investment, green recovery for a long time, the decontamination of land, the reuse of old industrial buildings, creating high quality new buildings, for commerce, homes and jobs, open space, active travel, all the things that matter in terms of lifestyle choices for individuals and for businesses in terms of where they might want to invest. And this history, this long history, means that we have, with community and political support, means it's a great place to spearhead the just transition that we're all going to have to do here, to bring people with us, and a place-based approach to climate emergency. There's 3 specific projects underway just now that I'd like to draw your attention to. We have the UK Geoenergy Observatories observing the mine workings in our area and the heat from the water, and also looking at geothermal. So we want to develop that into commercial propositions. That's a big project funded by UK government, £9 million over a number of years, and that's live in the area just now. We have a district heating system on site, £6 million of investment, funded along with our colleagues from Scottishpower, thank you Barry, and Scottish Water, who are going to be running their water treatment works in Dalmarnock from the energy. And we're going to service plots. So we're building it in order to regenerate a significant area. And finally, D2 grids, which will be a more advanced approach to district heating. It has EU Interreg funding. And that's the next big project for us to get off the ground. So things are actually happening at the kind of cutting edge of this agenda. So I think there's 4 things that Clyde Gateway can do for Glasgow and for Scotland. By putting in infrastructure first, which is the right way to do this, but also the highest risk way to do it. It's putting district heating in to attract homeowners and occupiers and businesses is high risk, but we're going to have models, funding models, and showing the way how to do that for other areas, because retrofitting is going to be very, very challenging. We're also Scotland's first Green Regeneration Innovation District. We were called that in the programme for government in 2019, so we're in a great position to innovate on an area basis and lead the way on that. We're also in the Scottish Government's Green Investment Portfolio, which was launched in September. So we have a role to play here as an investment-ready location to help attract investment into Scotland, as well as Glasgow. And finally, as a kind of proven collaboration between community, private sector, significant private sector investment and public sector, we're the best place to find the path towards a just transition, helping people into the green jobs that are going to come along with this and be comprehensive. And one of the ironies in what I'm saying is that we were set up to deal with the last great transition, which was from heavy industry, and which we're still dealing with the damage caused by that. So this time, using the lessons learned in places like Clyde Gateway, hopefully we'll get it right and plan in to the green transition, a just transition, and not be cleaning up the mess 40 years later. Thank you.
Ian, thanks very much. That's really great. Starting to shine a light on some of the investment opportunities within Clyde Gateway. Just to the audience, we aren't being bombarded with lots of questions, so do by all means start posting. There's one here for Anton that I'll ask in a second. Have no fear, I have 1,000,001 questions to ask the panel, so we'll be fine. But if there is anything you want to ask, having listened to everyone, put it speaking this afternoon, please by all means do. So let's just dive into those. So Anton, the question to you is bluntly, what will Glasgow University be doing to present your capabilities at COP26? What a great opportunity to show the breadth of your skills that this presents.
Thanks for that question. I'll try and be brief because there are so many events that we're organising. But to give you a sort of a headline, we're hosting a number of obviously international conferences, some around particularly specific issues around sustainability, Global Landscapes Forum, a major summit around water and sustainability. But to answer the question directly, we're working together with a COP26 network of universities. So not only obviously universities in Glasgow, like ourselves in Strathclyde, but many others across the UK to showcase all our capabilities. So that's really important because, frankly, if you look at some of the technological side, this kind of supply side, if you like, of what universities provide, none of us have the capabilities to provide, to feed technologies across the whole range of what's required to make that green transition. Each of us has to contribute. It is a massive collective effort in a way perhaps very different from what's happened before around technological transitions. So So I think that's really important, and we're going to try and showcase that as virtually as well as physically. And then finally, we are bidding for space in the green zone to showcase particular technologies that we're working with as a University of Glasgow, obviously in collaboration with other universities in the city and elsewhere in the UK.
Anton, thank you. Those submissions were due last Friday, weren't they? So hopefully,
absolutely,
this bid should get to know about that in May. Delighted to see the next question, because it was absolutely the question I was going to ask, and probably one of the key ones. And I'm going to focus this on finance, if that's okay. So, and to ask the panel about some of the barriers you are sort of experiencing in your organisations around sort of financing projects. And is that one of the availability? Is it the rules associated if you are seeking sort of green finance specifically? And whether you can say a little bit about some of those challenges. So, is anybody busting to sort of go first? Ian, I mean, this is something we spoke about the other day. I mean, it's something clearly very close to your heart, given what you're leading at the moment. Could I maybe put you on the spot and sort of respond to that in the first instance?
It's not the capital challenges that most people expect. It's all about risk. The appetite for risk from both public and private sector funders, and also the timescales. People wanting their money back far too soon and not willing to wait the period it will take for the project to mature. So we've been very fortunate in having partners in our district heating system who are willing, firstly, to take risks. Scottishpower Energy Networks is there for that purpose, to explore new projects. And Scottish Water, they're in for the long run, so their business is going to be here a lot longer than all of our businesses, providing water and doing sewerage. So they are willing to take that 25-year, 30-year approach to it. But you need somebody willing to underpin the operating risk, the what-ifs question. What if the customers don't come? What if the customers leave? What if the prices go up? What if gas gets cheaper? Or so on and so forth. And so it takes that long-term perspective that's necessary. So it has to be a sharing of risk, whether it's between sectors, whether it's with an agency on the ground who can take risk across a number of, we can accept financial risk because we can sell assets that are nothing to do with the project, or whether it's ultimately the public sector that bears it across a large number of projects, across a large geographical area. You can see people inching towards this, looking at the ways of underpinning risk, the ways of funding these projects, but it's painfully slow. And I think now we need to say, in order to get projects X, Y, and Z going, there'll be shovel-ready projects across Scotland. What is it going to take to get them moving, and then arrange the finance to make it happen, instead of trying to devise schemes and draw up schemes and then go out and ask projects to bid into it. The funders are going to have to come out and provide bespoke funding support, and that might be over a longer term with a much higher appetite for risk than we currently have. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. And certainly be interesting to see, the new bank, both in Scotland and the UK infrastructure bank, as that starts coming forward, and which and as will become very clear very soon. I am not a financial expert, but they seem to be mission based, with very specific sort of agendas around where their sort of financial support should be targeted. Ian, thank you. Anybody? Yes, Anton, thank you.
Sorry, I was just unmuting myself. No, absolutely. I think Ian has touched on this, but it's really worth emphasising. It's really all about risk maturity here, risk and the maturity of that risk, because there is plenty of finance, but it's essentially de-risking it, as Ian says, for those who aren't willing or unable to have a maturity risk. That simply doesn't match that, and I do think there's a role for government here. I mean, I was involved in some of the debates around the setting up of the National Investment Bank in Scotland, and as you say, the Scottish Bank and the UK Bank do have a role there. They can crowd in additional investment, and actually, it's worth reading for those interested in this area. It's worth reading Mark Carney's report in his role as UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, because you made it clear that mobilizing capital really does necessitate a pipeline of investable project, and really matching that risk environment that appeals to investors. There is a market failure here, and governments do need to step in and really, act to de-risk some of those projects, because otherwise you're not going to have that transition. It's a much more complex problem because of the points that Ian made. New technologies will have a barrier in terms of cost, and the only way to really address that is for there to be some public investment to complement and crowd in that private investment.
Anton, thank you. Anybody else want to respond to that? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, great. That's useful. I mean, and certainly, I would say to the audience, without knowing who you are, if there are investors in the audience that have questions or responses to that, it would be great to see that in the Q&A. Thank you, Gavin. 5-second warning question coming to you. A question around what you think the city, so Glasgow, can offer in terms of green that makes it different from other potential locations for investment elsewhere. So what makes sort of Glasgow stand out to maybe give it some first mover status here?
Well, Glasgow's always been a centre for innovation. We really have built a worldwide reputation on top of that. And we started off this panel talking about partnership. And I think coming to Glasgow as an investor, there's a real strength in that willingness to work in partnership and to develop in partnership. We've already done that with significant green projects. For example, the Glasgow Recycling and Renewable Energy Centre, which was a world-leading piece of plant when it was put in place, creates a huge amount of renewable energy and has the potential for a huge amount of renewable heat as well. We have a real will and obvious ambition to do this, and a real will to do that in partnership. And we've proven that. We have many times secured lots of investment through European funding offers, again in partnership with other cities across the world. And we've also brought in huge amounts of investment through things like the City Deal, which again is delivered in partnership, not just within the city, but within the city region as well, looking at how we can make those improvements. So as an investor, I think there's a real opportunity there to come in and not just work with the council, but actually work with the city, work with the major institutions in the city, benefit from all of the research and development skills, the innovation skills, the stuff that Anton's mentioned, the stuff that's been mentioned by Ian as well. There's all of that opportunity and intelligence and appetite there. Not only that, but we have such a great layout of a city for many of the things that we need for this transition. So things like district heating, we've proven how good district heating is. We know how well it works. We have a city that's made for district heating in terms of its grid layout and its multiple occupancy buildings. We just need that right investor to come in and work with us at the scale that we're looking at now. Earlier on, we were talking about 1.5 billion in investment. I can easily tell you about $500 million in district heating alone, and that doesn't even cover, a significant proportion of the city. So the investment's there, the will's there, and the partners are there to help make that happen. So I think on top of the assets that we've got a lot of green space that we're looking to turn into renewable heat and renewable power sources as well. But that partnership, that level of innovation and interaction really is what sets us apart.
I love that sort of bringing together the partnership, sort of culture that exists with the physicality of the city and sort of lending itself to some of the solutions that we actually need here, certainly in buildings. So, yeah, no, that's really interesting. Any other sort of adds from other panel members, sort of perspectives?
Yeah, just to echo Gavin's point, and a few ones, we need to remember that actually Glasgow's a really good scale. So you can do a lot of projects with a lot of good partners like Gavin's describing, as long as you pull all the right component partners together to get the capabilities across a group. And you do see that there's lots of good press releases and flagship projects, not just in the UK but across Europe. But one of the things about Glasgow is that it's got these so kind of multi-variable aspects to it, but it's a right good scale, which means that when you get a good project, you can actually make the economics work, and you can actually get enough scale of impact that it's worth doing. So it stops becoming flagship kind of demonstration innovation projects, and actually it lends itself to becoming commercial scale build out, and then you see the real kind of tackling of climate change targets against such a large area and vast population. So for me, that's one of the bits that sticks out beyond what Gavin said as well.
Thanks, Rory. I'm sorry, my eyes distracted looking at the questions coming in at the same time as you were talking there. There's one here that I'm sort of quite interested in, because the scale, you've sort of articulated a number of really sort of great opportunities for particular investment, but the scale of what we need to do collectively, Glasgow, UK, globally is sort of vast. So there's a question here that says there are lots of regenerative projects and initiatives, which is great. Is there anything that the city is doing to build regeneration into its everyday sort of business as usual operation? So it's sort of maybe investment in a different way in how do we maybe not so much sort of the standout projects, but some of the everyday stuff that we just kind of need to grip and get hold of. Anybody like to pick that? I mean, Barry, as a DNO, you're kind of at the heart of, providing power, reducing carbon intensity of power, the shift to EVs, and electrification of heat, etc. There's a lot there that is kind of on your shoulders in a way as an organisation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is going on in the background that a lot of people probably wouldn't appreciate. You flick your light switch on, and very rarely does anybody think about where are those electrons coming from. But the truth is, we have done a good job in terms of preparing the infrastructure for the future. We're constantly investing in that and the renewables in the background to feed that. But in terms of the question, business as usual, I think it is about trying to basically integrate the new infrastructure in a seamless way. Things like electric vehicle charging, which you see popping up all over the city now, and I use it quite a lot with our electric car, or certainly used to when I was allowed to leave the house. But being able to go into Glasgow City, the wider area, and be able to find the charge points round about, that's now business as usual, and we would use it as second nature. You see, the more kind of, as I say, electric buses, and we start to see things like hydrogen-fueled gritters and bin lorries driving around. For me, that is business as usual. So yes, the real tricky ones are usually the heating systems and everything that the panel's talked about so far. They're big chunky decisions, and they're something that we really need to work on very quickly. But from my perspective, I kind of see decarbonisation happening across the city, and for me, that very much is business as usual in many ways.
Great, thank you. And Anton, I was going to ask you, I mean, you spoke about the sort of the four main pillars in terms of contribution from the university, but also, developing skills and knowledge to, to address this going forward, and having, the engineers and the social scientists and, the people that we need for decades to come to help with this transition. I'd hesitate to say it's business as usual, but, you are, effectively bringing people forward with these skills.
Indeed, I think I think this is again a big challenge. Actually, at one level, it's business as usual because it's part of what universities do. They adapt very quickly to ensure that skills formation has the latest issues around technology or behaviour in the case of social science. But actually, if you look at the number of jobs that need to be filled as part of the kind of national decarbonisation strategy, it's a massive job. So actually, universities do, it's not just actually about universities, it will require the whole education system to align, because there needs to be a whole pipeline of skills starting from schools. Because if, for instance, if we want to educate more technologists, people in science and technology around decarbonisation, it has implications around training around mathematics and science and STEM subjects. Similarly, if you are trying to increase the pipeline around perhaps social sciences and and in other fields, again, that has implications about what you do back at school level. So we are looking at that, and we are looking at how sustainability has to be embedded in our skills formation in universities, but we're only part of the solution. And I could just make one other point, just on the back of Barry's. I think it's really important to remember just how much you can do in terms of business as usual in our own organizations. If I track the kilotonnage of CO2 that we've produced as a university over the last 5 years, on the back of actually very rapid growth in turnover, we've actually managed to cut quite a bit simply through better efficiency, carbon efficiency. And that's without any major technological change in what we're doing, simply through better heating systems and through better management of carbon. Now, the next bit is more difficult, of course, but it shows you how much you can do through business as usual, whether it's travel policies or things of that type. They can make a huge difference. And we've calculated some of that as part of our Glasgow Green strategy.
Yeah, they're really important points, Anton. Thank you. We're kind of getting close to the last 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and squeeze a couple of questions in, and then ask each of you, just, if you would, just to make some sort of concluding comments. So one is a question around the risk of not acting, and I'm going to ask maybe Gavin and Ian to sort of respond to that. And then the last one is going back to the Scottish National Investment Bank, and any thoughts from the panel on how the role of the bank may be leveraged in delivering net zero. And Anton, that, given what you said about being involved in that might come back to you in a few moments. So can I ask firstly that first question, then to Gavin, and then to Ian around about the risks of not acting. You know, I mean, other than clearly, you know, global risk, as we seem to inexorably be moving towards more than 1.5 degrees of temperature change. But in terms of the context of the city, Gavin.
Yeah, I mean, the global impacts are obvious. In terms of the city, you know, without restating the point, I guess Glasgow is and always has been a city of transformation, and we've transformed from being an industrial city towards this net zero city. And if we don't continue on that path, which we absolutely will, it's not in any doubt. But if we don't, the impacts are potentially huge. Obvious impacts from the impacts of climate change, increased rainfall, increased flooding. If we don't do anything to deal with that, then all of the impacts that come with that, the damage to property and assets and restrictions on people's movement. But also, you know, the number of jobs that need to be created to support this transition, the impacts on people's health and well-being. We mentioned air quality at the top of the panel. You know, climate change and people's health are inextricably linked. So it's not even for me a choice of if we do nothing. There is no, you know, thinking back to the previous question, I was kind of thinking as people were answering, is there such a thing as business as usual anymore? Really? I mean, for me, every day is different, and every day is completely new and innovative, and it's chasing new ambitions and new innovations and new ways of doing things. And business as usual, you know, especially as we hopefully come out of this pandemic, it doesn't really exist anymore. Business is unusual as usual. And we're constantly looking at everything we do, every decision that we make, even things that don't initially seem immediately about climate change. You know, how we manage our roads network, for example, the embodied carbon in the decisions that we make, it's becoming more and more embedded in the organisation as they understand more and more about climate change. And business now is, you know, a much more complicated, much more ambitious and much more considered approach to how we do the things that would have previously been considered business as usual. So we can't not do anything. That's the path that we're on, and we'll continue on it until we are successful. And by doing that, we'll create jobs, we'll improve people's health, we'll improve people's quality of life, and we'll continue to maintain Glasgow's position as one of the world's greatest cities.
Karen, thank you. Really, really important issues there. Ian, just if I may, sort of the same question to you. I mean, you're sort of shaping parts of the city for communities, new communities, and as I mentioned earlier, probably over the period of the work you've been doing, the net zero, agenda has really sort of come up the list of priorities. So changes to you and risks now of not sort of taking this agenda as seriously as we need to.
Yeah. I mean, Clyde Gateway is an intervention agency, so the not acting is not in our language. We simply are there to act, and maybe there's a need for that across the whole debate here. There's bodies who are single purpose, who are formed to get on with this job, because that's actually empowering when you've got no choice but to get on with it and to push forward with an agenda. It's actually very empowering, and what stood behind us was the community. The community wanted change. The community had seen false promises before, and the community watches everything we're doing. So that's actually, at the end of the day, very empowering, and you've got to get on with it. I don't think business as usual. Business as usual is dangerous because people are making decisions every day. So the every day in this country includes people making multi-million-pound decisions about the location of their business, whether they'll expand or not. Householders making decisions about where they want to live next, if they want to move home. So you have to capture that in terms of giving people choices. And the way that we're doing regeneration is to give people the free choice, businesses the free choice. If they want a low carbon environment, then Clyde Gateway is the place. If you want to live a lifestyle where you can walk and cycle, get the train, live in a house that's high environmental standards on a district heating scheme, then you attract people and you regenerate an area on that basis. And the final thing I'd say is when we have a really challenging project in front of us, the clincher is when we look at each other and say, well, we have to do this in 20 years' time, and people look at the decisions we've been making and we decided not to take the green imperative, then we're going to be slagged, absolutely slagged. So that's the stimulus to say, right, we really need to do this because people will not understand why we didn't take this risk in 20 years' time.
Completely agree. And as a consultant working in this area, I can tell you the number of sort of cases of litigation around climate change are growing almost daily. So yeah, it's interesting times. Anton, the second question, if I may, and put that to you, a question around how the panel sees the Scottish National Investment Bank role being leveraged in delivering net zero. I mean, it is one of their three missions to invest in this area. So, and it's a real national statement, isn't it, about the importance here.
It's a really important statement, and when it was created, it was important. It was at the start, it was made clear it needed to be mission-led. But again, just to emphasise, the resources at its disposal are a drop in the ocean. So when it was set up, it was made very clear that what it could do is catalyse other investment and crowd-in investment. And there is investment in this space. I mean, if you look at pension funds, insurance companies, they have to match liabilities over very long periods of time, over decades. And for them to be able to match those liabilities, they do need assets that have very long-term returns. So what an investment bank can do is have that first mover catalyzer effect to say, this is an important project, but it requires that huge resource that needs to come from these other sources, primarily large investment funds, pension funds, insurance companies, etc., that need to match those. Can I just say one other thing, though? I think what the pandemic has done is reevaluated the role of the public sector in these big investments. If somebody had had said, a year before the pandemic broke, we should spend another £2 or £3 billion improving our national testing on disease control, it wouldn't have happened. People would have said, no, what do we need that for? That's a ridiculous idea. Now, several hundreds of billions of budget deficit later, we wish we had, because every billion spent on that would actually have helped us mitigate the impact of the pandemic through a testing infrastructure that would have allowed us perhaps to have what the Asian countries had in terms of some of their testing infrastructure. Now, if we don't learn the lessons of that for climate change, then we're done for. I really think we need to learn that actually those substantial investments that can only come from the public purse to leverage that private investment need to happen, and they need to happen quickly. Otherwise, we will stumble into a crisis which is much bigger than COVID. The climate crisis is so much bigger than the wave we've just been hit by in the pandemic.
Yes, no, I mean, we're running out of time rapidly now. There was a question about behaviour change, and it really struck me, given the year that we've had, and still in the grip of the pandemic. This is not going to be the right language, but bizarrely, whether there is, or there are lessons to be learned, given the existential nature of sort of climate change. But given what we have been through, what we are going through, are there lessons, research that can be done around? So what were the triggers? I mean. Are there some lessons there we can start to apply to start to get that, those changes that we need? There was a great example, very unfortunate example in Cape Town, where they had a real climate sort of issue, running rapidly out of fresh water, and over a period of time, through a concerted program, the city managed to halve its water consumption, to get itself through this crisis. So, it is possible. Right, I'm going to stop talking. We're getting close to 4. So I just want to thank everyone. There's so many threads, to this topic, and we could continue to talk about this with the 4 of you for the rest of the conference. But we do need to draw things to a close. So I wanted to ask each of you just for a few closing remarks, if that's okay, just focusing on on either. I'm going to offer 2 options here. What you would like to see from COP26 for Glasgow, because we haven't really sort of touched on that, or what you see as the sort of the main call to action to deliver net zero in Glasgow from your sort of perspective. So a point on COP26, or a point on call to action to deliver net zero in the city. So, Barry, can I start with you, and then we'll zip round?
Yeah, and I'll be very quick, because probably my answer's the same to both options, and it's just about focus and acceleration. It's as simple as that, because in fact, the points that you both just touched on are perfect examples of how, whether it's public sector policy, spending, private sector investment, behaviour change, whatever it is, it's focus. So if we have that collective focus, and I do mean also from our company point of view, where we invest, the projects that we deliver, but also public and private sector and across society as well, that focus is the first point, and then just how fast can you do it? And if COP26, even if all we see it as an accelerator of projects in Glasgow, then it was worth it. So it's about that acceleration. What projects were you going to do anyway, and you think are kind of 23, 24, 25? Can we do them in 2022? Can we announce them in 2021? Can we even build them in 2021? So there, as I say, they're my 2 things, certainly, that we are taking forward as a team, about focus and acceleration.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, the opportunity for COP to provide that focus and just bring this to people's attention is massive. Ian, turning to you. So,
yeah, 2 things for COP, or for anybody. One is investable projects. We don't have enough of them. It takes hundreds of thousands of pounds of work before you get ready to go on site. So we need many more of these across Glasgow, and we need our colleagues who are on this conference to go out selling those internationally to get investment in. So we think we're ready for that. And the second thing is the community and people side of it. The thing that gets people going in Clyde Gateway is jobs. So we have to work much harder at getting jobs, new jobs, green jobs, and getting people from our deprived areas into these. We've got models that can make that work, that are making that work, and that has to be our priority. People can't be left behind on this agenda.
Yeah, absolute right reminder, Ian. Thank you. Anton, please.
Yeah, for me, it's partnership working, and that's for both again. I mean, COP26 needs to come up with an enhancement on the Paris agreements. I think all those who are experts in this field are telling us that. And so we need global partnership working, but I think at the Glasgow level, we need local partnership working. And I think that's one of the key messages from this panel. I think it's the fact that we all have to find a very clear common purpose, whether that's in finding investable projects, as Ian just mentioned, or indeed trying to work together as a community, because some of the kind of scale effects that Barry was mentioning as well will only be realized if we work together on a number of these projects.
Anton, thank you. And finally, by no means least, Gavin, we've got a few minutes, so you could answer both if you wanted to.
Oh, well, unfortunately, I don't think I'll fill a few minutes, but I think that the other panelists have made all the same points that I would make, and on top of what they've said, I guess two things from COP26. Really, we need a lasting legacy from COP26. In the same way that the Commonwealth Games has a lasting legacy that's so brilliantly demonstrated by Clyde Gateway, COP26 needs to have the same impact at a much bigger scale. We're all working very hard towards COP26 with great excitement and enthusiasm. But afterwards, that's when the real work begins for me. And, following on from previous comments, we need to see that scale up. We need to see those partnerships being firmed up and built and projects being brought forward and invested in. So, yeah, that legacy has to be clear and it has to be quick if we're ever to reach our net zero targets. And the other thing that I would, I guess, call for action, and this is a call for action to me and my organisation as much as anyone else or anyone else attending, is communication. I think there was some questions that we didn't get around to answering about communication and behavioural change. And you mentioned yourself about the sort of abstract nature of climate change. We still need to get better at that, communicating why we need to do these projects, communicating where the benefits are, communicating how Glasgow grows and improves and excels through projects like these, projects that might seem to take a long time and a lot of disruption and a lot of roads being dug up and all of that, the benefits thereafter. We need to get much better at communicating what they are and how everyone can play their part in achieving our ambition.
Gavin, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I'm just jotting a few notes there, just in the last couple of minutes, just to make a few points. The people thing, I think, is so important. Literally days before the pandemic and the first lockdown in March, so probably almost to the day, I was really fortunate to be asked to do a lecture at the Glasgow School of Art, and it was around the climate change, net zero, and some of the work we'd been doing in ARUP. But it was such a mixed, audience of people focused on the arts, and it really struck me how huge generalization coming. But we've got many of the technical answers now, and we've sort of touched on those. But engaging people in this is really important, and I do wonder whether sort of engagement through other sort of means, through digital, through the arts, through other ways, is something that there's action to be taken there to get that sort of engagement. It's been really great to listen to you all, so thank you. But with your passion for the city, I'm really struck by the sense there are some really strong foundations here. Not only in the work that has been done, that is being done, but in the partnerships that exist. Gavin, I think you made the point about the sort of even the physicality of the city that lends itself to many of the technical solutions that we need. Ian, you made the point about needing more, yet more investable projects. There's great work done. We've got the portfolio is growing, but the scale of what needs to be done here is just vast. So that we absolutely cannot take our foot off the gas here, or the non-hydrogen, should I say, to continue to create that that portfolio. you mentioned, some areas that you see in your experience of market failure. So there, sounds to be some work there, but also, some projects like the heat networks are long-term investable projects. So if we can get those ingredients right, as clearly as happening across Scotland and other parts of the UK, there seems to be a good fit there. And Gavin, your point about legacy, yes, absolutely. It would be nice to sort of come back in a few months after COP and just reconvene and think, well, okay, so what has changed now? Is there a different message? Is there a different voice from the people of the city and more widely? So, right, we're a minute over, so I'm going to stop talking. Just to say thank you so much again. It's been a really good hour of really important conversation, which I've really enjoyed. Thank you to the audience for the questions, and I'm going to pass us back to Bonnie. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you to the panel for a really fantastic and rallying discussion, and thank you, audience, for joining us.